A good day and a happy evening to one and all present in the meet. A warm and cordial welcome to today's talk on the topic, My Success Story by Dr. Anne Mary Fernandez. I came across a quote quite relevant to our speaker's success, and I would like to share this on this platform. Every morning, you have two choices. Every morning, you have two choices, either to continue to sleep with your dreams or wake up and chase them. Either to continue to sleep with your dreams or wake up and chase them. Dear friends, I'm sure Dr. Anne Mary Fernandez, today's speaker, would not have left any stone unturned to chase her dreams. Thus, she has occupied a place where very few have reached. Welcome, ma'am. A warm welcome to Dr. J. Nirmala, Principal and Dean of Academics, Parisuttam Institute of Technology and Science, Tanjavur. A cordial welcome to all the participants. I would like to welcome as well as thank you all for taking time out and being here today with us. It's my honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Anne Mary Fernandez, who did not require a magic to transform her academic journey because she carried all the power within her, which made her think better and became the best to contribute to the world of young minds. It's so impossible to mention her every single accomplishment because they are a lot. She has had a vast experience for over 30 years of teaching UG and PG in economics and 17 years of experience in educational administration, being the first woman registrar of the University of Madras and Karunya University. She has been a resource person for UGC, had been a member coordinator and chairperson for NAC. Her achievements have been acknowledged by many awards like Excellency Award and Women of the Year Award, awarded by the University Women Association of Madras chapter. Madam's profile run endless, so I have highlighted few notable achievements. And I would like to say that it is such an honor for us to have you today with us to share your experience of academic journey. Welcome, ma'am. The screen is all yours to share your experience, your story of success.
It's a beautiful, lovely evening, and I'm really thrilled to be in touch with so many of you whom perhaps I know or I have taught or I've influenced some way down the road. It's absolutely thrilling for me to share my life with you. I'm 66 years old, and sharing my life with you is difficult because it would take a very long time to tell the story. But however, I am just going to highlight some of those things which are relevant, which will inspire you and give you the zest to continue your journey, whether you are a teacher or a parent or a student. So I'm very thankful to Dr. Prema for those kind words of introduction. I'm thankful to the organizers who have given me this opportunity to share this story with you. And let's get into the main part of the discussion. Let's move on to the first slide. I'm really honored that I am invited to talk to you on my success story. What does success mean? What is the world view of success? How does the world view success? Normally, a successful person is very famous. They would be a film star or an Olympic medal winner, or let us say who has achieved some fame by topping some Fortune 900 company or something like that. But I'm none of those. Okay. A success is also viewed by the world as somebody who has power. For example, the ministers and people who have influence, great influence in society, leaders and people like that. I don't have that kind of power with me. Success is also viewed as wealth. Wealth, that means in terms of the amount of money you've accumulated, the properties you have, the cars you own, and the lifestyle which you lead. Well, I'm quite an ordinary person. I don't have all that kind of a wealth. I'm just very average. Influence. Some people are really people who influence. In a way, I have been an influencer in the taking into consideration the fact that there are so many of you whose lives have touched, but really it is not that level of influence which makes a person famous and which could really claim to be success in terms of the worldview. But as the poet Longfellow rightly says, the lives which great men all remind us that we must make our lives sublime and departing leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. If this is going to be taken as the hallmark of success, yes, I have left my footprints on the sands of time. And that is exactly what I'm going to share with you, the footprints which I have left behind, and so that it will inspire you in your journey. Again, so that you may leave your footprints on the sands of time for the others who come after you to follow. We move on to the next slide, please. I'm reminded of this small verse by the poet Robert Frost from the poem The Road Less Traveled. Two roads diverged in the woods. I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Yes, friends, all of us are faced with these choices. We have a choice of traveling the way everyone travels, or we have the choice of taking a route which is less traveled. In my case, I really took the road which was less traveled, and that I should say makes a difference. So this poem really holds good for me. We move on to the next slide, please. Now, why did I take the road less traveled? Now, did I have a choice? I should say yes and no. In a way, I really did not have a choice because many things were determined for me. For example, my birth, my parents, their profession, and things like that were not within my choice. But then there were many things which are also part of things which I chose to do. And this evening, I will share with you both of those things which were not a choice, and those things which were really a choice in my life. So I would start with the early challenges of childhood. I was born to parents. My father was a military officer. My mother was a housewife. Was born in the city of Bangalore. I was an only child. I was born late into the marriage. My parents were quite old actually when I was born. And my father, being a military person, he was subjected to transfer every 3 years. So every 3 years, we would move to a new city. It would mean a new school for me. It would mean new teachers. It would mean new friends. It would mean, new languages because we moved all over India. I have spent time in Maharashtra, in Bombay, in Uttar Pradesh, in Meerut, that's Meerut, which is part of now the national capital area, in Pathankot, and then in Avadi, and then, finally, my final destination was Trichy. And that is how I came to become a Trichyite and perhaps joined Holy Cross and then taught there for 30 years. So this was really a challenge in my life because I didn't have a choice on this. Where I went was not a matter of choice for me. It was predetermined. Wherever dad was transferred, we would move as a family. And the schools there, I would be put into those schools and I had to study. And the challenge was that in those days, education was quite not so homogenized. In different states, we had different systems of education. To give you just one example, in some of the states, the academic year would begin from June and end in April or May, April. In some states, the academic year would begin in January and end in December. And whenever I went to a new school, sometimes I would be mid-year and I had to fit into the mid-year and in 6 months cope up with the syllabi of the whole year and then manage to get through so that I could go to the next academic year. And when I went to the next station, perhaps there the academic year had already started and I would have to manage midway through. So these were challenges. And I was always the odd one out because, usually children who study in a school are from the neighborhood, from the locality. They know one another. Their families are, friendly. So I used to always be the stranger over there, the odd one out. It would take some time for me to really get to know these children, mainly because they would be talking to in the local language, and it would be difficult for me to understand until I had caught up with the smattering of the language and was able to understand them. And then again, in North India, the whole physique is different. The children are really, they are fair, they are beautiful, they have lovely hair, none of which I had. So I was always the odd one out. I was quite dark, short, chubby, and things like that. And so I would be the butt of ridicule for some time with all my friends. They would tease me, or they would, what you call, pass remarks which were not very accommodative. So I had to put up with this. Now, these things I never had any choice about. But my parents, despite all these things, wherever we went, they took a lot of pains to train me in discipline and hard work. So they would tell me whenever I went home and cried and said that my friends said this and that they teased me, my mommy and daddy would say, it doesn't matter, you have to really prove yourself. You have to prove yourself. So I was made to work very hard. I was taught discipline. My father, being an army officer, you need not say, we were a very disciplined family. So getting up early and then following a routine, going early, being punctual, and all these things were inbuilt into the family ethos. So these were some things which was given to me as a gift by my parents. And also the learning to cope with all these handicaps. So wherever I went, my parents wouldn't entertain me to like complain about these things. They would always encourage me to overcome the handicaps which I faced. For example, if we were in Maharashtra, I would have to learn Marathi. It would be, compulsory because every state wants its children to learn the regional language. Then my father used to write to the government saying I'm an army officer and my child must be exempted from learning Marathi because I'm transferable from one state to the other. So for some time, I would have to sit in the Marathi class without being able to understand anything at all. And then afterwards, after I got the exemption, then there would be some relief. So I learned to overcome these handicaps early in my life. Next, please. So really, I never had any choice about that part of my life. Now, stepping out of comfort zones. See how I was able to really come out of, really these circumstances are such that today if you put a child to so much of stress, then I'm sure that they would crumble down. But somehow it was perhaps divine providence and also the encouragement of my parents that I was put into an ecosystem where I could get over all these handicaps and kind of get the better of it. So how did I get out of these handicaps? Again, getting out of comfort zones. My parents always encouraged me to be very disciplined. Early to bed and early to rise used to be the kind of formula which we followed at home. And early to bed really is not early in today's sense. I would go to bed at 7:30. I would be put to bed at 7:30 and I would rise every morning at 4 in the morning. So this used to be the family routine. So even though it was in North India, it's pretty cold in the winters. It's freezing cold. It's difficult to get out. You have to cover yourself with a quilt and sleep. And most often in those days, there were no heaters. So we would have a coal heater in the room, and that would heat the room. And it would be very cozy and comfortable to sleep in the mornings. But despite that, I would have to get up. And then my parents also would get up. There would be a warm cup of tea and biscuits. And then I had to get to my books and start studying. So this from very early age, I was taught how to come out of the comfort zones, getting out from a warm bed and then getting up and taking your books and studying. That really was something. Going the extra mile despite hardships. Well, uh, now slowly I learned that if I really wanted to become, if I wanted my other friends to accept me, If I wanted my school to accept me, then I had to work extra hard, you know. So I had to go always the extra mile to prove myself so that I could be accommodated or taken into the circle of friends. I remember whenever I went to a school as a stranger, and if something was lost, they would always suspect that I was the one who took it because I was a stranger and they did not know me, they could not trust me. So this you always used to hurt me a lot. Why do you suspect me? I'm, I'm innocent. I used to go home crying. Then my parents used to say, no, you have to prove yourself. So always working the extra, always working extra. So I used to had to learn harder, and whenever I did better in studies, people would accept me. My teachers would accept me. My friends would accept me. So always I had to go the extra mile, always being well prepared, even sometimes over prepared. Okay, because this is because I used to always be the last choice in the class. Whenever, a class of 60 and you have a poor teacher who's trying to cope with all these children, and being a newcomer and being a stranger, keeping a very low profile, I would always be the last one to, be asked something. But if I was well prepared and over prepared, then perhaps I could give answers to things which others couldn't answer. And that was the way in which I got recognition, right? So when I could answer something which others couldn't answer, people would sit back and look, and they would take notice. They would come and talk to me, and then that is how I was able to really. So I had to be extra prepared. For example, it was the time when John F. Kennedy was assassinated, and there was a quiz competition, and we used to listen to the news in the family. All India Radio, we used to listen to the news every day. Father used to make it a point to make me sit down and listen to the news. And after the news, he used to quiz me on what actually happened, what I heard. So in the quiz competition, suddenly it was asked who killed JFK. And nobody was able to give the answer, but I was able to give the answer. And therefore, everybody sat up and looked and they clapped. And that was the way by which I established myself. So then zero procrastination. I was always taught to do today what needs to be done today and not put it off for tomorrow, because tomorrow is not really guaranteed. Of course, my parents did not tell me tomorrow is not guaranteed, but I was made to do everything then and there. Being an only child, even if it's a simple chore which my mother wanted me to do, if she told me to do something, I had to do it immediately. There was no choice because there were no other brothers and sisters who could do that. So whenever something was asked, I had to immediately respond and do it. So it became a part of my ecosystem that whatever needed to be done immediately and not put off for a later time. Next slide. I was very fortunate to have a wide and diverse exposure, and being subject to different kinds of environments. So, my father being an army officer, we were in Meerut, I think, when the Chinese war and the Pakistan war took place in 62 and 68. And my father was directly involved in the operations, in the sense he was in charge of a frontier vehicle depot from where the vehicles going for war used to set out. So, and at that time, there were the Pakistani planes used to come and attack, and Delhi being the capital, Meerut being close to Delhi, once a plane had come, an enemy plane had come, and very often we used to be subject to what was called as air raid drills. So we had to just go and lie down flat in the ground, or sometimes the siren would go and we had to go into trenches. There would be trenches. So no matter if the rice is cooking half, you have no time to take the rice down and go. You just have to go into the trench and sit down there till the all clear siren is blown. So whether you ate or you did not eat, whether there was no time for anything. You just had to go there. So hardships of war, I faced it. There was shortage of fuel. There was shortage of electricity. So many shortages at one time. There was even a shortage of rice because that was the time when India was importing from abroad. We were not able to produce enough food grains in our country. So we used to eat all kinds of other millets and things as a substitute for rice. So we really went through the hardships of war. Exposure to different languages and different cultures. As I've already told you, different states, different languages, different cultures. I had to sometimes, you had to learn. So today it is really an advantage for me. When I go on NAC teams, I'm able to understand the language of many states and I'm able to converse, in many of these languages because had this early exposure. Exposure to both affluence and poverty. Well, most of the schools I went to were good schools. They were either convent schools or they were good schools, except for the last one. The last one was the Kendriya Vidyalaya, because by that time, the government had understood that defense personnel had a lot of problems with the education of their children. And they set up a set of schools called the Kendriya Vidyalayas, which had the same curriculum and had the same languages, and all the defense or the transferable people's personnel's children used to study in these schools. But until that time, until 8th standard, I had to study in different states, have exposure. But although the schools were supposed to be good schools, most of the children coming to these schools used to be very well off. But comparatively, my father being an army officer and being a very honest and straightforward person, we were a very middle class family. And we never, I mean, while others used to come on scooters and cars, my dad used to drop me on a cycle. So that itself, I was able to have to mingle with people of different, coming from different socioeconomic strature. Experience of discrimination. Yes, there was a lot of discrimination, in sense people always prefer their friends, people always go by looks, people always go by outward appearances. I never had any of these things. So there was a lot of discrimination which I had to face in the initial years. First hand view of societal ills experienced by women and children. Well, this I have to fast forward to later in my career. All of you know that while that was the part of my early childhood background, this exposure to societal ills of women and children really came only after I was in the profession. As some of you must know, that sometime in 1986, our college had become autonomous. And then we started a branch called Rural Management. And I was the one who spearheaded this rural management course. And as a part of it, we had a lot of field visits where we went to villages and got exposed to NGOs and so on and so forth. So this really brought me in contact with a number of organizations which dealt with the problems of women, children, and societal problems. And later on, I also became a development consultant. See, one of the things which I did was whatever I studied, whether it was economics or rural management, I used to always apply it in my life. So as a matter of applying it, I did a lot of evaluations for non-governmental organizations. Some of them were regional, some of them were national, and some of them were even international. So while studying, while going to the field level and studying, I used to sit down with people from different villages, with children's organizations, with people who are specially deprived, and study their issues, problems, and try to see how the NGOs were intervening to kind of deal with these problems. So I had a wide exposure to these things. A first-hand experience of environmental degradation and natural disasters. This is also a continuation of the same. I did a project for an international organization where I visited 14 states in India, 14 states in India, along with an international team to assess the what you call rehabilitation measures which that particular NGO had done when natural disasters took place. For example, the Gujarat earthquake, or the flooding which took place in different parts in the Brahmaputra Valley, or the landslides which happened in Uttaranchal, or the earthquake which happened in Latur. So like this, the drought which happened in Gujarat. So I had a first-hand experience of looking at how natural disasters impact the lives of people, how it displaces people, how it gives an opportunity for people to make a new start. After all, everything is lost. They come back and they make a new start. So this really made a great impact in my life. I was able to internalize this and understand that no matter how big a setback may be, you can always come back and you can always start from the beginning. It's never too late to make a new start in life. So these were my choices, right? These were not choices which were given to me. They were choices that I made. International exposure. As a part of this journey, I also traveled abroad. I traveled to Sweden. I attended an international conference on what is called as Future Earth. And later on, I had the opportunity of traveling to Germany and then to United States and Canada. So I had a lot of international exposure, which gave me an idea not only about uh, how these organizations coped with different human problems, but also with the system of higher education which was followed and how they went about educating their youth. So these were some of my success stories, because I had an exposure to such a diverse kind of environment. Next, please. Yes. Now I come to economic and financial hardships. Well, uh, being the daughter of an army officer, being an only child, had its own limitations. I told you at the start that my father was, father and mother were pretty aged when I was born. So when I was in the eighth standard itself, he had retired. Dad had retired, and we had settled down in Trichy. I've just started my eighth standard in Kendriya Vidyalaya. And when we shifted from army life to civil life, this was a very big change in our lives, because in the army, everything would be given to us. Whichever station we went to, we would have a fully furnished house, and we would get all our rations and everything, it was assured. But once we came out to civilian life, we had nothing. We had to start from zero. There was not even a table or a chair. We had to purchase everything. And on the meager pensions which dad got, and the in those days there were no fabulous what you call retirement benefits as we have these days. So the little money which he got had to make do for setting up rented accommodation. Much of the pension went towards paying the rents itself, and whatever remained was with what we had to manage. So it was extremely difficult. Being an only child also was extremely difficult for to meet the ends. There were days when I couldn't go to school because my shoes couldn't be repaired. There wasn't even that much money at home, so we had very limited resources, and knowledge that education was being provided amidst hardships to ensure employability. So in a way, I was the old age insurance for my parents. They never had a big bank balance, or they never had fixed deposits. They never had any property, right? Of course, my father came from a very rich family, but they had donated everything during partition when they went back to England. They had donated everything to the church. So we had no property. We had to build up everything from scratch, right? So I was at that. I was given that. I was made to understand that I was being provided education so that I could really uh, support my parents and support my family. So that was an understanding which was there. I needed to manage my own family and aged parents. Yeah, so my parents were aging, there were problems of aging, health issues were there. And amidst all this, my parents were determined to give me a good education. So after I finished my high school, then I joined Holy Cross. That also was, my parents did not come. They said, if you want to get admitted, go and get admission. So I just walked into the college one day. Sister Donna was the principal. And I said, Sister, I want to join. So she said, what do you want to join? All the seats are full. Because you see, I was studying in CBSE, and the admissions used to be made based upon the local Tamil Nadu board education results. So most of the seats were filled. And she said, what do you want to study? I only have some seats in economics. I said, fine, sister, whatever you have, give me. So that's how I joined economics. I didn't have any choice, right? I was asked to join and I joined, right? So, uh, but they were determined to provide education. They went through a lot of hardships. They had to even mortgage some of the jewels of my mother to make me really study. Although the fees were very paltry, very small amount of money used to be taken as fees in those days. But I understood that it was a challenge. Therefore, I was studying Hindi, so I used to get Hindi fellowships, Hindi scholarships. And then I took every opportunity to participate in debates and quizzes where I could win prizes, which would help me to kind of support the family budget. So I really used to go out to do these things so that the family budget could be supported. So need to provide stability for the family. When you go through economic hardships, there's a lot of instability. You don't know what's going to happen. Then you have to provide the amenities for your family also, because uh, living in a rented house, we every frequently the landlord used to ask us to shift. And again, there were difficulties in those days. The rented houses we used to stay in, the current used to be switched off at 9 o'clock. And if I really wanted to study beyond 9, it had to be done with the candle light or lanterns. So that is one of the reasons why I wear big specs like this. Hmm. Actually, it's only short sight, so I have taken it out because I can, see without the specs at short distances. So I developed myopia because of that. So there was a need to provide stability for the family. And that was one of the reasons which drove me to study hard and to really achieve so that I could provide, finally purchase a home of my own and give stability for my family. Yes, next slide, please. Yes, best efforts for best results. So I used to seize every opportunity for make the best use of it. Well, uh, as I told you, I used to go for debates not because, yeah, I used to enjoy going for debates and elocution competitions, but there was also a need to do that because unless I won these prizes and was able to achieve something, it was difficult for us. In those days, most of the debates and other things, we used to get cash prizes or national savings certificates and things like that, which went a long way in helping my family. And this taught me to seize every opportunity and make the best use of it. So I would like to narrate to you how I got this job at Holy Cross College. It was the final year and I was doing my MA. By the way, when I finished my BA, I thought I will not do my MA because there was simply no resources in the family to go forward to help me do my master's degree. Actually, I wanted to stop with BA and go for a job, but my teachers, very good teachers we had then, and they called me and said, "You're a very good candidate. Why don't you come and do your MA? We will all help you." And at that time I said no, because if I have to study MA, then I have to do maths and statistics, which I don't know because I was very weak in maths and statistics. As I told you, wherever I went, the academic year, sometimes in the middle I would go. So I never had a strong foundation, you see. I used to pass, I used to get through, but I did not have a very strong foundation. And therefore, I was not confident about taking maths or statistics. So in BA, my ancillary subjects were history and politics, political science and history. So when it came to do MA, I had to do statistics and maths. I said, no, I can't do it. But my teachers were very good. They said, you're a good student. You will definitely be able to do it. We will support you. And that is how I came up and did my MA. Particularly, I remember Mrs. Melusana of the maths department, who taught me statistics and mathematics from the scratch. She taught it in such an interesting way. Then after just 2 or 3 months, I was able to become the class topper. So it was really the efforts of my teachers. I would like to acknowledge them. We had some very excellent teachers. There was Sister Fabiana, who taught us history in the most fascinating way possible. Mrs. Melusana, who taught mathematics making use of literature and common life examples, which were so encouraging. So when I did my MA, and after I finished my MA, on the final day when I was writing my last examination, my head of the department walked in and said, after the exam is over, meet me. So I thought, I don't know what she's going to say. So after the exam was over, I went over to meet her and she said, "You're appointed." So have you ever seen anybody getting appointed like that? I don't think anybody has been appointed. So I was appointed as an assistant professor even before my results could. I just completed writing my examination. I was appointed. The very next day, I reported to sister, and she made me to correct papers. It was actually my own batch's papers. She used to get the university papers for correction. So she made me correct them. And of course, after that, she would correct it. And then she would tell me what mistakes I had made and how I can do it properly. So very next day after my examination, my career started. So, and then after the results came, I got an official appointment. So every opportunity which came after that, I used to take. I knew how difficult it was. So in those days, we really had a lot of what you call. Uh, in the beginning, I think the juniors always have to take more classes. So I remember even working up to 22, 23 hours a week in the early days. But that was really good because, and to begin with, I was not given economics to teach. I was asked to teach logic and scientific methods, which was just one paper which I had studied at the PG level. But I took up the challenge and I said, okay, I will teach this subject. And I taught it for the initial years, for very many years for the PG students and also for the PUC students then. So every opportunity which came my way, I used to take it up and make the best use of it. I used to shun easy fix solutions. See, right from the beginning, maybe my upbringing was so, maybe the difficulties which I faced were so that I came to understand that taking easy solutions always is not the best way of doing things. So always, for example, studying only the important questions. My mother never used to encourage me to do that. She would make sure that I was thorough to the entire syllabus. So that became a habit with me. So I would never go for just important questions, but be thorough with the whole portions. So not taking easy fix solutions, but going through the slow prodding process of doing everything correctly so that there is no chance of failure because there was no, I mean, I did not have any leeway to fail. To fail means not being able to do anything further. So I could not take that. I always had to do everything systematically so that there would be absolutely no risk of failing. Working every day to better myself. Well, as I looked around me, I could see many people who were not doing that much, right? They used to, of course, they had a job. All of us were colleagues. We all worked together. We all did the same thing. But, I used to always spend a lot of time in the library. I used to read a lot. And whenever a new book comes, she'll give it to me because she knew that I would read a lot. So she would give it to me and she would say, "This is a nice book, read." So like that. So I used to spend a lot of time while others used to do other, I don't know what they were doing, but I used to spend a lot of time in the library reading up new books, reading up all the new magazines which came. We had very beautiful magazines which came in the department library as well as in the college library. I think we were very fortunate in those initial years because we had, if you ask me, the Journal of American Literature, the American Economic Review. These are very expensive journals, which of course today are available online. But those days, the Reserve Bank of India Bulletin, all these things we used to get it in our libraries. And I used to make it a point to go through these things and then to get more knowledge than required. I did not need all that to teach. Okay, to teach BA or MA, you don't need all those things. But these were ways of equipping myself. I was trying to make myself better. Of course, I had an ambition of writing the IAS, but there was no choice for me because my parents said, "You're an only child. We don't want to let you go far away. And since you've got a job here, you better work here itself." So I was not given I was not allowed to do the civil services, which is a regret till this day. Perhaps my life would have been different if I had to undertake the civil services because at that point in time, my fund of knowledge was really very vast. And that continued, of course. I was not discouraged by adversity. So whenever things did not go my way, I was not discouraged because I've already told you there were very many circumstances. In professions, there are a lot of professional jealousy happens. People, sometimes we get scolded by our bosses. I remember Sister Loretta coming and telling me, whatever you're talking is going over the head of the students. You better don't, because I used to read all the foreign authors and take class from those books. So she used to say, no, no, you have to come down to the local textbook, read half an hour and teach for half an hour, which was very difficult for me because I kept a higher standard for myself, right? So, but despite adversity, I was not discouraged. I kept continuing. Somebody who was subject to that kind of a remark would say, okay, what is the purpose of reading? Let me just read the local textbook. And after all, you don't need to read it. After you have read it twice, it all becomes automatic. You just stand in the classroom and keep delivering. But no, that any new book which came, I continued reading. I did not take these adverse comments personally and curtail my activities because of that. Always focusing on the greater good of the larger number. Well, this was more, uh, you know, uh, more as an administrator, I concentrated on doing this, the greater good of the larger number. Certain things were sometimes good for me, but not good for everyone. Okay, so but then I would not take into consideration what is good for me, but I would take into consideration what is good for everyone, right? Uh, to give you examples, when I was in Madras University, there was this problem of you know the we had a correspondence education program where number of people were complaining, saying that they were not getting their degree certificates. They would do their correspondence only because they wanted to improve their qualifications to get a promotion. But if they did not get their degree certificates, then they could not claim for their increments or promotion. So they used to keep rounding in the university trying to get their degree papers. Now, on my rounds, I used to meet these people and they used to say, see, we didn't get our degree papers. So finally, when I went to the Department of Correspondence Education and saw that a lot of certificates were accumulated there, and I asked the clerk in charge why these certificates are here. And he said, they did not come to take it, madam. I said, what rubbish? They're coming every day. Why are these certificates accumulated here? Then I came to know that these people would charge some money to give these certificates. So as soon as I knew that, people came to me and they offered, they said, madam, this is a system here. We divide the money, we'll share it with you and all that stuff. I said, no, see, it's a sacred mission we are following. So you have to give these certificates without taking any money. So I put what you call as a mela, certificate distribution mela. I advertised it in all the newspapers, asked the people to come and collect the certificates. And I told these clerks, in case there are any certificates left here, I'm going to fine you. So in no time, these certificates got distributed, and everybody, I mean, whoever wanted to get their promotions, they would come back and thank me, ma'am, but for your intervention, this would not have happened. So that is the greatest good of the largest number. Balancing short-term requirements for long-term goals. Well, again, I always had the long-term in view and not the short-term. When I was in Madras University, there were offers where if I had to take the shortcut, I could have stayed on permanently there. There would be no problem. But then I realized that if I compromised on these values, then later on, my later prospects would not be good. My reputation would be damaged and I would not be the same person I was, right? So I made decisions which were in long-term goals. Actually, I could have challenged some of the decisions they made. I could have gone to court and I could have challenged it and remained in that position. But I did not do that because I did not want to spend the rest of my life going to court and answering questions. And I thought that I have a greater career, I have more to contribute. Why should I spend my years in such a negative way? So I took the long-term goal into consideration. I quit. I quit my position there and I came back. I came out. I quit even my job in Holy Cross because already somebody else was appointed in that position. And if I had to go back, since I had come on leave, if I had to go back, then that person would suffer. So I said, no, I have talents, I can manage. And that is how I gave in my voluntary retirement and I came out. And that's when I became the registrar of Karunya University. And that was another 5 glorious years when I was able to contribute to that university. So always it would be the long-term goal and not the short-term benefit. Next, please. This is an interesting part. Very often people say that women normally are restricted because of our biological roles which we have to play, particularly giving birth to children and raising a family. Well, it is here that one has to balance career and family. And if I was successful, then it is because I was able to balance my career and the family, doing justice to both, doing justice to both. So career, I would take career equally serious and family also equally serious. And how you may wonder, how did I do this? Well, I used to keep these two as far as possible distinct. My career would end the moment I step into the house. So whatever I was, whether I was an assistant professor or a reader or a registrar or a pro vice chancellor, the minute I stepped on across the threshold of my doorstep, I would be a mother and a housewife. Okay, I never used to carry these things with me home. So office is office, home is home. No doubt I used to read and do some work at home, but at home I would be more responsive to my family, to my husband and my children. Communicating with spouse and children, and seeing and understanding, and what you call sensing and understanding the challenges, you know. So this is very important. See, in a marriage, communication is very important. If we don't communicate with our spouses and our children, there is room for misunderstanding. So the more you communicate, the more easier it becomes, because others can understand you better. My husband is a police officer, and he used to be frequently away from home because his duty was such that he would go somewhere, and he was in intelligence, so I wouldn't even know where he was. And those were the days when we did not have cell phones. So he would simply disappear for 4 or 5 days, and then he would suddenly appear, or there would be somebody coming and asking for clothes, saying, he is, Aya has asked for clothes because he needs to stay on there for a few more days. So that was the type of thing. But whenever we were together as a family, we spent, quality time communicating and understanding each other, embracing the advantages of an extended family and meeting its challenges. Well, I should say that much of what I did, I owe to my mother, because my mother was with me right up to the end. My father passed away in 1985 itself, and he was with me only till he passed away because I was an only child. So I took care of him. And my mother was there till 2006. So she took a lot of responsibility with raising the children, with managing the household. But I had challenges. I had challenges in the sense, mother would never understand. It was we had a generation gap between her and me, because she was brought up the old way, and she simply couldn't understand why I had to study further. After joining, after with a fresh MA, I joined this position of assistant professor. But after that, what happened? I had to do my MPhil. I had to do my PhD. So I was studying while the children were studying. I was studying. So she would say, "Isn't your studies over? Shouldn't you be taking care of your children rather than studying?" She could never understand why I was going on studying, right? And whenever I did something extra or traveled somewhere, she would never understand, why do you have to do all these things? See, you're a mother and a housewife. And if you go about doing so many things, then your family is getting neglected. But, so I had to always meet with that challenge. She always used to dissuade me from doing these things. But she was a great source of, encouragement for me, because she was there all along to take care of the children. I could leave them and go anywhere because I could trust her to take care of them. So if you have old people at home, please accommodate whatever their tantrums, or it's not easy to keep old people. There's always a generation gap. They don't understand you. But then it's always, for a working woman, it's always good to have an extended family, because they provide the grounding for the children. Training children to share household chores. Yes, because we were all working. So therefore, from the beginning, they were taught that they also have to take responsibilities at home. They have to manage their clothes. They have to manage their uniforms, get it ready before they could go to school. So training them to take care of household chores. Then leading by example by being a continuous learner. No, I never had difficulty with making my children study. This is because I was all the time learning. So we would sit in the kitchen. In the kitchen, we had a table, uh, and while the cooking was taking place, we would all sit around that table. I would be preparing for my classes. The children would be doing their homework, and whenever they need help, they will come and ask me, and I would also be learning. So because learning was a part of our lifestyle, it was never difficult for my children to learn. So by example, it was possible for the children to have an interest in learning, reading, acquiring knowledge, and things like that. Not having unrealistic expectations from my children. Both my children were above average, and they could have really done very well if I had to sit down with them and drill them as my perhaps my mother had drilled me when I was young. But I did not do that. My children also told me, "Mother, don't expect us to get state ranks or get fantastic marks. We will get decent marks and we will pass and we will get good seats in good colleges, but don't keep harassing us to get the first rank or the first mark or whatever it is." So I gave them the liberty. Once they decided, I said, yes, that we have agreed on this, fine. So after that, there was no tension. They would study and they would also get these. They would keep up their promises. I would also keep up to my promises. Being truthful about my limitations. Well, there were many things which I couldn't do. For example, I couldn't take my family on extended vacations. We couldn't go out for movies and cinemas and theaters and hotels as others did. These were my limitations, and I would explain it to my children and say why. See, these are the things we can't do, and these are things we can do. So, communication was very important. Priority to human values. Well, this was again ingrained into me by my parents. Importance to truth. I should say that truth is the most powerful weapon which one can possess. In my role as an administrator, these values are those which really made me outstanding. It made me different from others. Uh, importance to truth, because if you are truthful, then you need not be afraid of anybody. You can face anyone and you can talk to any, you can call a spade, and you can call a shovel, and nobody can really question it because you are speaking the truth. Practicing humility. So not allowing power to become, to go to your head. No, some people become very arrogant when they become powerful, but actually that is not how you can be a good leader. To be a good leader, you have to practice humility. You have to have the team spirit. When can you have the team spirit? Only when you are able to what you call relate to everybody. Not only relate to the professors, but relate even to the class 4 workers. Sometimes they are very important, and if the class 4 worker is not there, a lot of things don't happen, right? So practicing humility, emphasizing integrity of character. I've already told you that when you are in administrative positions, a lot of lucrative offers come to you. We'll give you this, we'll give you that, and can you do this, can you do that? So if there's integrity of character, then you can stand your stead. For example, um, whenever research projects come, usually there is a kind of some 2% which is given for administration, right? So my earlier predecessors used to take this 2% of the research budget, and they used to take it as their contribution because they are administrators. So when I came into those positions, they would come and give me the check for the 2%. I would say, no, I will not take this 2% because I have not put any effort. Administration is my job. Taking care of research funds is my job. Why should I take this 2% extra? I would give it back to the project. And that is one example. The integrity of characters, that was very much appreciated. And people knew that, I would be a strict, I could be strict and I could follow the rules because I followed them myself, right? So if I did not do that, there would be difficulty. Seeking to be impartial. This is very important. You have to be impartial as an administrator. If you are partial, like for example, I have never appointed any of my relatives to any of the positions in the universities which I went to, because I could easily have done that. I had enough power to do that. I did not side my friends. I had no special friends. I could talk to everybody. So being impartial is very important, because the minute you become partial, then there are groups, then there are coteries, and it becomes very difficult for you to administer properly. Always leading by example. very important. When you're in leadership positions, lead by example. For example, in Madras University, there was a big rain and floods were there. The university was getting flooded. You know, there are kind of rectangles which were getting filled with water. And there was a server room close by, which was, if the server room gets affected, it was this season, November season, when the semester exams were going on. And if the server room gets affected, then the whole question paper setting, the communications between the university and the examination centers would be disrupted. And we called the fire department, but nobody would come. And then what I did was we went down, we saw it getting flooded. So what I did was I just took a bucket, one bucket of water and started throwing it out. Immediately everybody came, they followed. And in no time, in about 15 minutes, the whole, flooding was removed. So when you lead by example, you have others following up and problems are solved. Putting others before self. Again, this is very important. You have to, in administrative positions, you have to always be selfless. Sometimes you have to suffer, but it's okay. As long as everybody, I told you, the greater good of the largest number is what you have to take into consideration in these positions. Yeah. So, friends, I've tried to share a little bit of the insights into my life. And really, success is about leaving a legacy, right? So I began by telling you I'm not famous, I was not powerful, I was not wealthy, I was not influential. But then why am I a success? I am a success because I have left a legacy, right? Among the audience who's listening to me today, all of you are my legacy, right? Similarly, I have left my footprints on the sands of time. And Madras University, the first ever woman registrar to the date for 150 years. Karunya University, the same. Apart from that, there are many other achievements which perhaps for another time we can take it up. But really, success is about leaving a legacy. And how do you leave a legacy? The fame is vapor, it just evaporates. Riches take wings. It can be here today, it can be gone tomorrow. Only one thing endures, and that is character. And it is only the character which was given to me through my circumstances and the choices which I made is the reason for my success. Thank you, friends. Thank you so much for this beautiful evening.
Always with a smiling face. I had seen you crossing the veranda from A section to B section you went. I still find the same smile on your face. How did you conceal your anger? I'm sure all human beings, no, the anger always surfaces. How is it, ma'am? That no, most of the time, I'm not short tempered, but no, sometimes when things go against what I think, so I get angry very often with my children. So how is it? How have you managed anger?
I am not inhuman. I also have my sprouts of anger, but it doesn't last for long because nobody commits mistakes. Very, very frequently, people commit mistakes knowingly. Most often, it's unknowingly that they do it. And it's very human to get angry. But after you have expressed your anger, after you have told what you want to tell, attack the incident and not the person. And therefore, I don't carry any anger against a person. It is only against the incident or the activity which is done. And therefore, why shouldn't I smile at the person? We are all human, we all make mistakes. So let us correct the mistakes, but let us not get angry with people, because I too can make mistakes. Anybody can make mistakes. I have made my own I have had my own mistakes in life, and so there's no reason to be permanently angry. A smile goes a long way in establishing human relationships. If we can't smile, then we can't really relate to anybody.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Attack the incident and not the person.
Yeah.
That is, I loved it. No, that can even be called as a quote over here. Attack the incident, not the person. So that's how we cannot prolong with the anger. We can make more friends. Thank you so much.
Good evening, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, this is Clementia from Physics Department.
Yes.
Ma'am, your talk was quite wonderful and interesting, ma'am. Interesting listening to your experience. And I was really taken away by the determination you had despite of all your troubles. And as Prema ma'am said, your talk was well organized, ma'am. I couldn't keep it up. I just want to share it instead of putting it in a chat box. And as you said, ma'am, it was really a challenging, ma'am, to do justice to both career and as well as family. And I really admired. And thank you, ma'am. Your talk was full of inspiration. Thank you very much, ma'am.
My pleasure. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I hope it
Yes,
inspired
ma'am.
you.
Yeah, I had a chance of listening to your spiritual message.
Yeah.
And I think whatever you have achieved in your life is only because of the faith and only through prayer, I think, ma'am.
Undoubtedly.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And ma'am, this is Turin. So again,
Yes,
it was a
Turin.
blessed evening today, ma'am, because I've seen you walk in Holy Cross, the way you hold yourself every time, at any instances, all that you have taught us, especially during our faculty development programs, the orientations that we have had, the sessions on values, especially on environmental concern that you have already shared, has gone a long way, ma'am. And what we today owes a lot to you, that the word that influence you use, yes, you have influenced many youth and many generations at Holy Cross. We thank God for giving you a special gift to Holy Cross for that 30 years. But we were unlucky that you couldn't stay with us. But we shouldn't be selfish also, yes. So that's what brought you out, and you were able to serve many more people. So we thank God and thank you, ma'am, for this nice blessing that God has created you as a person, Anne Marie Fernandez, and how much of gratitude you owe to your parents. The sharing of your entire life story was really very interesting, ma'am. And as Clementia said, I was just to ask you about how you balanced your career and family, because we find it very difficult nowadays. But the nice tips that you have given us will help all of us. And many of our students have also joined. So it will really be a great awakening session to them. And thank you, ma'am, for everything. And this moment, I want to specially talk about the Rescapes project which you initiated. I think that was the time which you were about to leave the college with your voluntary retirement. And it is really a great blessing, ma'am, where now we have 24, sorry, ma'am, adopted villages which are greatly being benefited in all spheres, ma'am, be it the environment, the literacy level, at all aspects, like we are giving consumer awareness. Even at this time of demonetization, when in the village, people couldn't use the ATMs. It were our students who helped them to go to the ATM and educated them. And a lot of services, that's just one small example I'm trying to tell, but be it water tanks or the public toilets. So such a lot of work is being done through Rescapes. And we are so happy that you were the person who initiated that project, where there is a lot of community development and sustainable, as you said, yes. So your vision for the long term has been fulfilled, and we surely believe you are a blessing to many. Thank you, ma'am, for this nice session.
Thank you, Turin. Yes, Rescape is my brainchild, and it has come out of those circumstances which I had explained to you. And I'm very glad that you're taking this legacy forward. It really fills my heart that you are really taking it forward to its goal. Thank you so much. Thank you to all who are working with Rescape.
There is a question in the chat box by a student from Kaveri, I believe. She's G. Manisha. She has written, ma'am, you are an honest person and you have faced many struggles. What is your motivation? What motivated you to undergo all that?
See, when you talk of motivation, it is only your values. The values when actually this session doesn't give predominance to, I was told that we don't talk about faith, but here it is, what I'm talking about is general. Values are universal to all religions, and it is the firm grounding in values which gave me the motivation to move forward, right? Because all people who really achieved something had to go through a lot of hardships. Okay, you take Gautama Buddha, he had to go through a lot of hardships. You take Mahatma Gandhi, he had to go through so many hardships before he could really do what he had to do. You know, you go through Martin Luther King, he was assassinated for the things which he did. So really, I was not assassinated, I did not lose my life, but suffering is a part of achievement. If you want to achieve, you cannot do so without going through difficulties and sufferings. And it is your values which carry you through. The motivation is the value. When you have a goal or an aim in front of you, then that leads you, and it is the motivation for you. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much on behalf of that student. Any more questions, participants?
Dear Mrs. Ann, ma'am, your presentation needs a special word of admiration and appreciation. I can never forget my days when you were my teacher. I used to enjoy your classes. And today, if I am standing in front of the students as an associate professor, I owe my special word of gratitude to all my teachers. And especially, I would like to say something about your presentation. It really touched my heart, and you came out with your successful life story. So I was thinking of my story also, and you motivated me. But I would like to raise one question, ma'am. Sometimes when we go through certain difficult situations, especially with regard to realities of life, I'm not able to digest and say that I'm going to come forward to control these kind of difficulties. So under such a situation, what I have to do? Can you just give me your response or your
I
solution?
couldn't hear you very properly, Shamain. Your voice was very feeble, but I understood that again you're talking of the challenges and how to overcome it. Am I right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, yeah. So there are two ways in which you can overcome challenges. Sometimes you can just react to it. When you react to a challenge, you're not doing the best thing, right? So when instead of reacting to a challenge, you have to be proactive, right? You have to be proactive. Like to give you an example, if somebody has been very rude to you,
Yeah.
or somebody has really said something which hurts you, then in that case, you should not reply by hurting that person, but you should try to understand that person, understand the motivation why that person has spoken that way, and take some special efforts to establish a relationship with them. Do something which will correct that imbalance, right? So always it is not tit for tat and butter for fat. That is not the way in which you can really achieve success. Maybe in that particular, again, short term and long term. Short term, it may satisfy you, but in the long term, it will harm you, right? So you have to keep your long term interests in view. And as I told you, you have to always be proactive, react to a situation by being proactive and not reactive.
Ma'am, but we are human beings, no, ma'am. So,
Yes, we react. We do react. Sometimes we do react, but always, uh, you can always correct that reaction by taking proactive steps. Go out of the way to deal with that person, or see why that person. Try to understand that person, and then how to kind of get to a better footing with that person.
okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am, thank you so much. Quite interesting and overwhelming is your success story, ma'am. Swimming against the opposite current from the early childhood.
Yeah.
The road less traveled, you said, had made all the difference. And having less or no choice has helped you, ma'am.
Yeah.
I think we need more time to discuss about. No, I have not seen somebody telling a story of their own,
Uh,
a successful story in such an organized manner. I think tomorrow I can also speak volumes on this points that you have shared, ma'am.
Hmm.
Ma'am, a person's life with clear vision of future, with unwavering principles, I think I believe in that, with added values, with will surely be a success story. And all that you have, ma'am. Though your journey was winding high and low, but with dedication to a set of standards, what you presented on the screen, you are indeed a role model, ma'am, to the present generation and to the generation to come. Hats off, ma'am, and thank you so much, oh, ma'am. Now, may I request Dr. Nirmala, Principal and Dean of Academics, Parisuddham College of Technology and Science, to propose the vote of thanks.
I deem it a privilege and honor to deliver today's vote of thanks. First, I thank our Almighty for having given this wonderful day in our life. On behalf of We for Youth team, I would like to express my sincere thanks to Dr. Annie Mary Fernandez, today's resource person, the first women registrar of Madras University and Karunya University. Ma'am, the insight you gave about the road less traveled brought different perspective opportunities in our life. Your thoughts about ignoring comfort zones shows the right way to proceed with a great vision. And your explanations on balancing career and family and priority of human values really inspired us. Ma'am, my sincere appreciation for your humbleness and sweetness in your personality. Since you have stepped out of your comfort zone and you had a lot of hardships in your life, now you are not one among the women, ma'am, but one and only first registrar in 2 highly reputed institutions. Congrats, ma'am. Thank you very much for being a wonderful role model for a lot of women in our society. And I thank all the organizers of this virtual webinar and media team of We for Youth for having given this opportunity for many of us to spend this Sunday evening usefully. Finally, I thank all the volunteers and participants who graced this occasion. Thank you very much. Thank you one and all again.
This is for the participants. I would like to register at the moment that this YouTube channel, We for Youth, was started with the purpose to help the young people to face the unpredicted challenges by our society. We, the team members, are ceaselessly striving to strengthen your reasoning power, well-being, and to cope with challenges. So to empower yourself, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, We for Youth, www.weforyouth.com.